Good morning and welcome to, what are we on? Is this episode 15?
Hey, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Yeah, it might be 16.
15, 16. We're in that neighborhood. I should research and check these things out before we actually start talking about things. But that's not how we roll here. Welcome to a new episode of the Unifying Force. Is first one for 2022. I'm Dave. How's it going?
Gavin.
Theo, how's it going?
And as some of you may know, at the end of last year, we lost one of our prominent members to the group, is Rich Herman. And we've canceled a few shows, and we've been down for a while and haven't been around. So we're going to kind of do a topic today that's a little bit of a dedication to our friend Rich, is our brother who has become one with the Force. So we're going to talk about death, dying, and the various rituals surrounding becoming one with the Force in the Star Wars universe. And there's a lot to talk about. If you go digging and you go thinking, man, I mean, you know, what happens to Jedi? What happens to regular people? What happens to this clan? What happens to this sect? What happens to this culture? There's a lot of stuff out there. Is who wants to start? Who wants to pick one and think of what's going on?
Well, I noticed that cremation seems to be a running theme for a lot of different cultures in Star Wars. It's before the Jedi learned to become one with the Force voluntarily. That's what they would do to Jedi. They'd have cremations like we saw with Qui-Gon Jinn. We saw the Tusken Raiders do that for their burial ceremonies recently. We've seen that's what Obi-Wan and Luke did with the Jawas. And we've seen that in a lot of other cultures around Star Wars. What Luke did with Darth Vader. So we've seen that with a lot of different peoples in Star Wars. And it's a good question what actually becomes of like the regular people who don't really have the ability to use the Force. Because in Revenge of the Sith, Yoda was very surprised when he was telling Obi-Wan about how Qui-Gon was able to commune from the netherworld. Like this was a brand new thing. And they explored that further in season 6. So it's like, okay, if that hadn't happened before, when they say they're becoming one with the Force, is that just a nicer way of saying that, oh, well, you know, they've passed on now? Or is it like, would they actually go somewhere kind of like, you know, that the world in Mortis, you know, like where they go there and you see the different manifestations of people or whatnot. So it's kind of interesting as to how that flows.
Gio, thoughts?
Yeah, it definitely has a sort of poetic tone to it and a spiritual kind of journey to the beyond that is implied, because we do see that the Jedi that have been able to manifest something physical after death take on that spiritual presence, this kind of Force ghost. The spiritual element is preserved with their identity. And I think that's maybe one of the key things that surprised Yoda, in that a Jedi master who learned from him indirectly through the teachings of Count Dooku was able to come across this vast discovery and something very powerful, you know, kind of beyond the knowledge and the wisdom of all the other masters around. I think that the idea of becoming one with the Force is a very epitome of the idea of finding peace and a really good descriptor for how I think the Jedi strive to ultimately find peace, whether in life or in death afterwards.
Yeah, so the biggest question and thing that I wonder about that is, what is the difference between, the Jedi that have allegedly learned to become one to the Force and just disappear into the Force? Luke disappears into the Force, Yoda disappears into the Force. Does Anakin disappear before the body is burned? I don't think so.
No.
But Qui-Gon, who we know comes back as a Force ghost, does not. Obi-Wan, of course, does the same thing. And the or there is, what is the major difference between those that have become one with the Force and just disappear, and those that leave a body behind to be cremated? I think, cremation is there are plenty of rituals. We see the ones that are dramatic, that they've built a pyre for Qui-Gon and for Vader, but I think there's is it Rebels or is it Clone Wars episode where we see that there is a crematorium, a ceremonial chamber in the Jedi Temple, where it's not like a big display where you see that, but they have this kind of underground chamber that there's this light that emerges from. So it's obviously their ritual, but why do some people just disappear, and why did some people leave a body behind?
Well, I think that was something that came about after, they learned how to do it, kind of thing. Like once Yoda started communing with Qui-Gon and figuring it out, and then teaching Anakin, or teaching Luke,
Mhm.
or Obi-Wan. No, he taught Obi-Wan, and then Obi-Wan would teach, and so on and so forth. They eventually figured out how to do it so that apparently they could just become one with the Force and become like Jedi spirits almost immediately. Whereas Qui-Gon apparently did have to have gone somewhere when he died, because he had to go on that journey posthumously, unless it was a continuity error. Because as we saw in season 6 of Clone Wars, Yoda had to go to the heart of the galaxy and go on this whole vision quest with the Force priestesses and all that. So it's like, well, did Qui-Gon do that sometime before Phantom Menace, and they just didn't? Obviously, that movie came out before they wrote that storyline, and then maybe it would therefore just be a continuity error that he gets burned and doesn't disappear? Or is it just he was able to do something after death that allowed him to come back? Because presumably he's the one who is, as we know from season 6, he's the one who started communicating with Yoda through the Force, telling him to go on this quest to do this.
Right.
I guess Yoda almost became the student to Qui-Gon after Qui-Gon passed on, which is a nice kind of inversion of the usual master and apprentice relationship. And taking out the continuity and writing aspects aside, if Qui-Gon is the sort of idealized Jedi that can harbor all elements of the Force, good and bad, and acknowledge the failings of the Jedi Order, and to create something new and be something that we've discussed before, a potential new type of Jedi, a Jedi who's more attuned to all aspects of existence and choice and decision, then it would be a nice fitting metaphor for him to be the first one to have discovered this and then teach Yoda, who was his master before, and everyone's master pretty much, that this key to immortality, as Yoda described in Revenge of the Sith, something that he may have gone on his own journey. We don't know for sure what Qui-Gon saw beyond, but I think it's a nice parallel, the whole continuing metaphor of family and sons and fathers, and taking on the sins of the fathers, but also absolving them and finding redemption. If Qui-Gon is the one who was almost a son to Dooku and to Yoda, is then able to give this final lesson that will bring about a sense of permanence to Jedi who find that peace within themselves. In my head canon, I would like to think that Qui-Gon did go on his own spiritual journey and have an odyssey of his own. In in terms of when it would have taken place, as soon as he was slain. From then beyond, you've got 13 years effectively between the ends of the Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith to have that. But perhaps if you were to go to a Force Nexus or somewhere important like that, the way Yoda did and the way Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka discovered in Mortis, perhaps it's a plane without time and without space, really. And it's more a series of challenges he overcame himself, and then he was bequeathed this knowledge, this power that he could then teach and pass on to others, as is the tradition.
I think you've hit a lot of it, the nails on the head right there with that. Is a lot of what we're going to think about this is going to occur in our own headcanon. And the time travel aspect completely answers my next question, which was, well, if they've got to go on this journey and they've got to figure this out, how does Anakin come back as a Force ghost, only hours perhaps after his death as Vader? They see him as who taught him. No one showed him in life. He's just immediately come to this amazing resolution or power.
I chosen one bonus.
What's that?
Chosen one bonus. Perks of
That's
being
right.
chosen
He's
one.
the chosen one. He gets to do what he feels. But you're right. Is Mortis is the world between worlds, and does time actually apply there? We've talked about and mentioned before is Mortis could completely open the world to the Star Wars universe to time travel, and does. So perhaps Anakin spent even more time in his redemption, and that's why he gets a Force ghost, even death technically kind of as a Sith and living as a Sith, is he's had a lot more time with Qui-Gon, with Yoda, with Obi-Wan, communing with the Force after his death.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking on it, I think what probably happens to people who are not Force sensitive is that, there's some tribal societies where it's like they celebrate because your body gets recycled by nature. And like Yoda says, the Force is in everything, the trees, the rocks, the air, the wind. And so it's like he's celebrating because life gives way to new life. This is why he tells Anakin in Revenge of the Sith that, and somebody goes, mourn them, do not miss them, do not, because, rejoice that they're becoming one with the Force and are being added to creating more life, whatever it is. And so I would think that's also kind of like a polite nomenclature or something that he's using. It's not, I don't know if it's necessarily that even the regular people go on to, those types of planes of existence. At least I don't get the vibe that that's happening.
Yeah, see, I think it's a really weird contradiction right there. Is the Jedi, the cremation ceremony, and we'll get around to what do they do with the ashes at that point? But it is a little bit, or would be a little bit more poetic if they were interned in some sort of natural recycling garden or something where their bodies could nourish the earth and become one with the Force and the nature and this and that. But they're not. They're cremated and move on. Or it's even more the ones that just disappear. Well, that's a very big missed opportunity for your body to nourish the earth, or like plant a tree or something. I don't know.
Well, it was really neat also about the whole disappearing thing that said Obi-Wan is, as far as I know, is the only one who actually did it willingly. It wasn't that he was dying. It's that Vader was swinging his head, but if you watch, he gets into position and he deliberately does it. He's already disappearing before Vader's saber even starts cutting into his robes, which is really amazing. I don't think we've seen that before or since, where a Jedi can actually just disappear and join the Force on command.
Right, is because arguably, Yoda was very old and he was kind of struggling a little bit to talk there at the end, and we presume that the exertion of doing a Force projection that as powerfully as he did just, caused that to happen to Luke, used all of his energy.
Yeah. I think that's the one other example that I would say could be interpreted one way or the other, that with the end of Luke Skywalker's lifetime physically, whether it was the exertion or whether it was also an element of choice that he, when he fell from the rock, that to me looked like the efforts of the exertion and the strain and the exhaustion. The fact that I think Rian Johnson had Mark Hamill climb back up on the rock and then look out onto the sunrise, to me, it gave me a potential, up to the viewer to decide, was Luke able to then choose to surrender himself to the Force and then took leave of his body, his physical body vanished. And when I saw Luke do that at the end of The Last Jedi, I was obviously devastated to see, it's everyone's childhood hero gone. But the element of maybe Luke Skywalker was so powerful that it was his choice to no longer need that physical presence, that what he could do from beyond was something that didn't require his physical self anymore. And so it was of his own volition to move on. And it did remind me of when we saw Obi-Wan give himself up. The obvious key difference being that Obi-Wan, it was a real sacrifice in the moment to save Luke, Han, and Leia, and allow the distraction and diversion of the Empire, Vader and the Stormtroopers, to let the Falcon escape. But I see that it could be read with the end of The Last Jedi that actually Luke also did kind of submit himself in a more metaphorical sense rather than just a physical sacrifice, but then chose to sort of willingly give up his physical life.
I think definitely an argument for either way. There completely are is things, and that's the fun part about talking about a lot of these things within the Star Wars universe. They're not, everything is not spelled out, and many things are up for debate. Is how did that happen? Catherine mentioned this a little bit a comment ago. Is what about non-Force sensitive people? What about the regular people? What happens to all of them? Do they become one with the Force? Is there different levels of becoming one with the Force?
I wouldn't think so. I think they just become one with the Force in the sense that, like I said, the body gets recycled by nature, and then because the Force exists in all the trees, the rocks, the wind, all that, then that's kind of their nice way of saying, they've become one with the Force, but really they didn't.
There's a possibility of that. I think I've seen. I think it's going to be culture. Blah, blah, blah. I think the opinion of that will be different from each culture. There are cultures who don't necessarily, that we've seen yet, at least in canon, have a relationship with the Force. You mentioned earlier the Tuscans that we've just seen in. It's not Monday. I can't do a spoiler alert for that. But we've seen an episode where Tuscans are burned. Is the dead Tuscans burned? And is that respect, or is that just an artifice of that's what we do with Jedi and that's what we do with others as respect, we're going to do that? Or is that just a convenience of disposal of the bodies?
Might be a convenience, because I know that at the Lars homestead in Attack of the Clones, there's actual graves, and they buried them. Like Anakin's mother just got buried in the sands.
Yeah. Ishimi got buried. We don't ever see what they did with Padme's body, do we? We see the funeral, we see the open casket. I don't think we ever see what they did with Padme's body.
I don't think so. They might have mentioned it in one of the Vader comics.
Okay.
When Dr. Aphra is investigating the allegation that she might have had kids, because she finds the mortician or whatever who tried to cover that up for the family. And I think they might have mentioned what they did with the body at that point, but I can't remember what off the top of my head.
I can't remember exactly either. I want to say that I have heard that, Vader visits a grave or a memorial at some point. As part of his grieving, becoming further into the dark side process, but I can't lay out to where it is. anybody watching this either live now, or if you're watching this in the comments or in the future on the virtual Cantina network, is lay it out there for us. We're always interested in getting more knowledge. But yeah, Anakin just buries Shmi at the Lars homestead. Is Rey buries Luke and Leia's lightsabers there ceremonially. But another thing that I don't know is if you're saying everybody becomes one with the Force and it's the rocks and the trees and everything, you would think that the life force of animals and plants and all of the people would be that, but the
fact that Qui-Gon had to go on an actual journey, though, kind of like Yoda did, to be able to figure out how to come back, I would assume that he was even able to do that because he was a Jedi and had like the Sith, for example, they can't cheat death after they die. It's like, with Palpatine cloning himself, that's because it's a clone, but you can't, I remember when they were in early development in episode 7, they flirted with the idea of having there be like a Sith Force ghost, and they quickly threw it out. They're like, no, that goes against like the basic tenets of the Force in Star Wars, or the Sith are not capable of coming back and manifesting their souls after death. So and that's because of their selfishness, their all that kind of thing. So if they can't do it, whereas the Jedi can because they're selfless and all this and have a specific connection to the Force, then I wouldn't think that regular people would be able to come back as spirits or anything like that, at least not in the way we see the Jedi do it.
But see, that's where I think it gets weird, because yes, somehow Palpatine returns and it's as a clone, but it appears to be his own mind in that clone, the original Palpatine's mind. So he's found a way to physically manifest himself through technology, but his spirit has continued in some of the same ways as a Force ghost. So that it ends up to a whole other weirdness.
We know they didn't put any thought into that, so they didn't follow the rules of Star Wars when they did that. So that doesn't, I don't know if that one really counts. But
it doesn't count if anything that happened in the sequel trilogy is
especially as we go further beyond. Yeah.
Eventually you get to a point where it's like, wait, this doesn't jive with any of the rest of canon at a point, and it's like, well, I can't really hold that against it if it's not like, yeah, like his spirit being able to jump across the galaxy into another body, that doesn't really track. Like, because again, the Sith, as George said, they can't manifest their spirits after death because of what they are. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, what about the argument that the regular people and everyone who believes in the Force, who would say, "May the Force be with you," or believes, like Han has come to believe, it seems, he says the Force, the Jedi, it's true, all of it. Those who have become to believe, is there Force heaven, that they don't manifest themselves and come back into this plane? Is it something like the Christian belief where there is another plane where that would be where they reside with the Force? Do we see any evidence of that?
Well, there might be, because like, again, Qui-Gon apparently didn't learn how to do what he did until after, or at least that's what we're assuming, that he didn't learn how to do that until after death, but that's still a question mark, so maybe.
What do you think, Gio?
As to specific examples, I'm not really coming up with anything, but in theory, it definitely could be the case that there's no reason to think that just because huge numbers in the millions or billions in the Star Wars galaxy do not follow the specifics, ins and outs of the way the Jedi, interpret and live their life according to the Force, would be exclusionary, and would be, simply there is a kind of heavenly afterlife just for those who followed the specific ways of the Force according to the Jedi. I'd like to think of it as being a little bit more inclusionary and equal opportunity for anyone who, any person, any sort of race or species in the galaxy that has those qualities that the Jedi fight for and live by, even if it's not in an official sense that they are part of the Jedi themselves. We see that with the other different Force groups. If characters in the Star Wars universe can access the power of the Force, there's no real reason to say they wouldn't be able to have the at least potential or the opportunity to access areas after the material existence ceases. But I do think that the fact that Qui-Gon was there's a very select number of Jedi that have that proficiency. Qui-Gon is the first chronologically to find that in the saga. And then beyond that, it's those who've had close personal and significant interactions and relationships with him that have that power. It's not something that kind of comes out of left field or is stumbled upon. It's a sort of discovery of one sort of spirit, and is then almost given as a gift to others that he touched in the physical life that he had. But yeah, in terms of specific examples of whether other characters and other denizens of the galaxy, if they can, if there is a sort of a Force afterlife, there could be. It's just not one that's explored overtly on screen yet, and might not be for the duration of this run now, in a post sort of George Lucas canon and sort of story group centered view, because it really can open a lot of possibilities and questions, and sometimes I think writers could be wise to keep things left to interpretation rather than so strictly and definitively say, okay, this is what happens to a specific group, this is what happens to specific characters, and it's the sort of same for all. But yeah, it's definitely a fun one to talk about, because from everything that I've seen and read, and definitely at least going from on screen within the saga and Disney Plus lifetime of Star Wars so far, I think that the ability to use the Force is something that can be universal. It's something that ideally is taught, and we're shown one or two very effective ways in which it is done. But without having that specific education, might limit what one can do physically here in this life, but we don't know what limitations it would bind people or characters by afterwards. One would assume that you need a certain proficient level of training in the Force to be able to be attuned to it, to be able to be kind of at peace and in harmony with everything, and that might require a specific sort of level of power, level of synchronicity with the Force. But these things are, when it's been specifically kind of numerically condensed by George Lucas with the idea of midichlorians.
Yeah, I think he's actually given like a number of a midichlorian count that you have to be able to be something, and I think originally that was not in his brain in canon, so.
Well, the midichlorians have been in canon since 1975 in the original notes. Yes,
is that not to the level that they were given in sort of an amount, and you have to be over 7,000 to be able to do yada yada blah blah, or this person has more than that person. I think that the original notes that midichlorians were just the life form that influenced the Force, and possibly even there was discussion that they were in all beings, but just in varying amounts when that happened, and when the quantifiable thing, when that occurred. I can't give you a specific example.
I think also the way they mentioned that in Phantom Menace that he has a high M count was used more as a plot device, because because Qui-Gon was going to need something to help verify his beliefs to the Council, so that they'd even be willing to talk to Anakin.
Right.
And that's kind of probably why he goes so far as to actually say that, which is probably why he used midichlorians in the way that he did, is basically a unit of measurement, like a plot device, to get that part of the story moving. which had they spent more time on the script, he probably could have come up with something else. But I just kind of always perceived that more as just a plot device.
Well, and I think a lot of what we're talking about probably is in the actual, creation is why was Darth Vader burned in a funeral pyre as opposed to just evaporating and, like others would have, is because it looked cool on screen. Because
Didn't Kylo Ren, when he died, did he eventually disappear? Because you don't see him at the end in a Force ghost form or anything. I can't remember, but because I remember he transfers his life force to Rey. He falls over dead, but I can't remember if he disappears or not.
He does vanish.
He does vanish. Okay, so
yeah,
so he vanishes.
And then as soon as he vanishes, the camera cuts to Leia's motionless body under the shroud, and she disappears too.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an interesting one right there to talk about, is like Leia had a motionless body. She did not immediately vanish. She was there for a while. Was that a conscious choice of her Jedi power? Was she, physically using that body and its physicality to stay and inhabit this plane to help Kylo, to influence his actions, to see what was going on? Why did she disappear at that moment, or wait until that moment to disappear?
I would think so. She first kind of slipped into unconsciousness near death when she reached out to him when he was in the lightsaber fight on the Death Star wreckage. Because he pauses and he turns around because he hears the voice as if she's actually there, but she's not. So she had actually reached out to him in that way. So I think that might have been like Force powers stretching on or something after death. Like she was just kind of reaching out to him. And since he was the last bit of her, once he died, they both kind of went with it. And maybe, who knows, maybe it was her somehow forging that connection, which caused him to disappear, because I didn't get the sense that he had ever learned how to do that unless Luke had taught him how before he went, AWOL.
Right. Is possible.
Which is possible, because that's another huge mystery in terms of canon as well. It's like, what exactly went on in this academy? Where was it? And did he teach them things like that about, transcending death?
Yeah, I don't know. Is there are always room for those holes, to come back in and be filled in.
Right. And as I think about it, just saying this is like when Anakin told Yoda about his visions of death, Yoda didn't recommend that he could do anything to try and teach them any type of way to, bypass, get past death or anything. He was just like, oh, okay, just, mourn them, don't mourn them, don't miss them, be on your merry way. So it's like, he's not, and by then he had already gone on his vision quest in Clone Wars. So it's like, he's not open to teaching other regular people about it. Or at least that's the vibe I got, that when Anakin was talking to Yoda, I think Yoda could tell he was talking about somebody who wasn't like a Jedi.
Right.
Because if it was, he would probably suggest, well, there's this thing you could do. But he didn't recommend that or suggest that for like, like a regular person.
Yeah. Well, now see, in my headcanon, I'm thinking that, there is more to believing in the Force than being one of its priests or one of its, monks like the Jedi would be. Is that we see multiple examples of the Jedi wishing "May the Force be with you" to people who are non-Jedi. Bail Organa, I think, would be one of the prime examples. Is they would, "May the Force be with you," and
General Dordano wishes everybody, "May the Force be with us," after he gives his briefing for the Battle of Yavin.
Exactly. So, I'm thinking we may be discussing, so far at least, we've discussed a very limited thing about what happens with Jedi, and those that know the Jedi as those are the monks or the priests of this religion. But there's more to what happens with the actual people, and I don't know that we see examples of that.
Well, we've seen, like, say for example, with the Night Sisters, when some of them physically die, they come back as like these ghosts and can physically manifest themselves again. And I remember, I think it was on a commentary or one of the behind the scenes thing for that episode, when they're watching the one where Mother Talzin finally gets it, and she dies, and like, oh well, how did she die? She come back. It's like, how do we know she was ever alive? Because they're just
Exactly.
like these spirits, and are able to do that, or like the cult from season 6 of Clone Wars that Mace Windu and Jar Jar Binks go to, and they also believe in talisman, and they do these weird sacrifices and stuff, and they believe that people come back as like these ghosts and spirits. So you have a lot of that type of stuff going on throughout the galaxy in terms of those types of beliefs.
Yeah, is the Night Sisters being just their physicality. I don't know if it's their physical bodies or their bodies and their spirit inhabit these pods that surround the area, so they never go away. I think that they've been brought back on a number of occasions to help defend the last Night Sisters. Like, was Asajj died and then was brought back to defend the Night Sisters, and used her other sisters to come and help in that defense. So there's evidence that that happens with others. Is that the Force? Is that some other force? Are there multiple forces? That opens it to it. I think in one of the video games, and I can't think of which at the moment, is you see Mandalorian funeral rituals, and there is it is, I think, listed in canon in Wikipedia, the Mandalorian death ritual, which reminds me an awful lot of like Klingon death ritual, which is funeral pyre and the warrior is being burned, and then everybody has these warrior cries into the night to warn whatever that here's another warrior coming dead. Now that's mixing Klingon and Mandalorian right there, but that's the impression that it gives me. Then everybody sits around and talks and tells stories of their greatness and gets drunk and all sorts of things. So there's apparently Mandalorian Stovall Corps or Valhalla. So we've got many different cultures that we're going to see and see the meaning of. I mean, possibly with Boba Fett's time with the Tuskens, are we going to learn more about that? Worlds and worlds and so many stories left in Star Wars to explore, and I hope we get some more of that stuff. Any other examples of what else have we seen with other cultures and their life or death rituals? What have we seen? The Night Sisters, we've got the Mandalorians, we have the Jedis.
We've seen on Moraband that the Sith would kind of have these crypts that they would, put the bodies in, that they didn't seem to cremate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But they haven't really. Star Wars hasn't really explored much on the subject of death outside of those types of people.
Yeah, I think it's agreed. And C-3PO and Ben, after Luke is gone, and I don't know what Luke did with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. I think eventually there are graves that you see there. I don't think you even see them until Rey comes back to the Lars homestead. Maybe that's when you see the graves. So presumably,
I don't know how many, because I know there were 3 graves in Attack of the Clones. One of them being Shmi's, and then unless there's the same 3 or more added to that, because they didn't show what happened to if he actually bothered burying them. Because
so the 3 could be Shmi and Clegg-Lars, and so we don't particularly know. But anyway, when we come back, when Luke comes back to them, we see Ben and 3PO burning the Jawas, and is that again them showing the sign of respect, as that's how we would bury, that was how we would, what we would do and deal with the body of a Jedi, or is that again a convenient way to get rid of the bodies? A little bit of both. So what do we see, and what is their argument for in headcanon or not about funerals, about celebrations of life or this. We obviously see there's a pyre and everybody gathers around for Qui-Gon. There's just this solitary pyre for Vader. Padme has a huge state funeral because, again, she's been queen and she's a current senator. But is there ever a service for Han? Do we ever see a service for Holdo? You know, what happens?
That is something
now
that
I've got you thinking.
yeah, the you're absolutely right. There's no such not even analog. There's no comparison to make because we don't see anything. And is that just Star Wars writers being a bit too pro Jedi and anti everybody else? Who knows? I think that's something that the death of Han would have hit everybody pretty hard on an emotional connection to the character level in The Force Awakens. And I think the fact that his character was so quickly dismissed from the emotional development and progressions of the remaining characters, definitely the original three, to see them go down one by one in each film, aside from actor and writer obligations and decisions creatively behind the scenes, the lack of a death for Han Solo definitely is a real jarring thing to me, at least, because he was such a significant factor in the original trilogy and in the actual realization of events going forward, because as we've seen, it was the child of Han and Leia that brought about a new era of recycled kind of imperial influence on the galaxy in the First Order. But to not have any kind of send off or funeral, or even a slight aside, a quick scene, a memento, something for Han, did feel remiss from episode 8 and 9, following on. I guess one could say that there was the subtlety of those dice from the Millennium Falcon that seemed to become more and more in shot as Star Wars started to reboot its engines. And you try not to be cynical and think, okay, that's easy merch to replicate and make and pump out. I remember, Han. But the idea of, at least symbolically, cherishing some physical reminder of Han that Luke and Leia shared, and that Leia was seen to actually have, is probably the only sort of tilting of the head to the passing of Han, which was really disappointing. And I'd like to think that as a hero in the Rebel Alliance, a general, he would have had some sort of ceremony and some sort of remembrance, somewhere that the resistance and the remaining protagonists in this new era of rebellion versus empire could remember, one of the main characters in their entire struggle for freedom.
Yeah, I mean, I will even accept the argument that, okay, well, Leia didn't do anything because, again, Leia learning the ways of the Jedi at this point is, no attachments, no whatever. There's no body to burn. Okay, I'll get that. I'll take, Luke's out of the picture, or Luke, when he hears about it, no, again, Jedi Master. I'll accept Rey. Okay, she's learning the way of the Jedi. But Chewie doesn't do anything? But Lando doesn't do anything? There's... I don't get it. Is maybe there's no state funeral, but like a small remembrance, a gathering of people. I don't know. Catherine, thoughts?
Well, they don't have anything for Han because of the way the story goes. They're in the middle of a battle and in the middle of the war. They have to get the hell out of there. they're already beginning the evacuation by the time they get back. And then in 8, they're on the run the whole time, which is why they don't have time to stop and do anything for Akbar or Holdo or any of those people, and are further getting pummeled down at the base. So they might have done something after they escaped to wherever it was they were going. I haven't read the canon books set between 8 and 9, so I don't know if they did something or not, but I think it also has to do with just where the characters land in the writing as to whether or not they're going to get that attention or not.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think it has to do with them being Jedi or Sith or anything like that. It's just like where it's like, yeah, it made sense. They're going to have a funeral for Qui-Gon because the battle's over. Everybody's had their victory and blah, blah, blah. So they're going to do that. And then you move forward with the other characters. Like Vader, yeah, that made sense because Luke brought his body back. Like Obi-Wan, they didn't really do anything for him either. It's like he dies. And then Luke is kind of upset about it for a minute. And then they move on. Yeah.
I mean, you're right. That's what happens. It's where are we in the writing? What happens is to move the story along. That's what we're going to see. We're not seeing every moment of all of these people's lives. Is maybe it gets written down in some extended, expanded tale. Maybe it doesn't. We see the same thing in the MCU. That, you know, after the action, after everything happens and everything's settled down, is Tony Stark gets a funeral, whatever happens for Natasha Romanoff.
Well, they already gave her that moment when they all came back from the time heist. I think that's why. And then you have that other moment with Clint down by the river or whatever, or by the lake or wherever it is that he's standing. And honestly, she was a supporting player through some of them, whereas Tony was like the guy who kickstarted it. So of course they're going to give him the big send off, which is again, I guess what I'd call a casualty of the writing. It's like, yeah, of course they're going to give the big, the kudos to, yeah.
So Mike makes a point that I did not totally see it as this, but it's possible. Is I saw it as just a bit of fan service. Mike says, didn't Maz give Chewie Han's ceremonial medal? In my mind, this was just, oh, he finally got a ceremonial medal. It did not occur to me in watching that was Han's.
Yeah, because Leia was still holding Han's when she died, and then Maz presumably got that from her and gave that one to Chewie.
So, there's your moment and your remembrance is that's what.
But it was framed more as like a happy thing, like, oh, here's your medal for fan service, as opposed to here's something to remember Han by,
Yeah, and that's why I never read it as that. So, just seeing that and doing. And Sean mentions is, yeah, there could have been something out of respect for Han from Lando, but
Lando wasn't in the first 2 movies, so he might have done something when he heard about it. But it's kind of odd because when they first meet Lando in Episode 9, he says, when you see her, give Leia my love, implying that maybe they haven't seen each other for a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have to acknowledge that as small as the galaxy seems sometimes in the Star Wars saga, that, oh, these people just happen to run into each other and come together, that we're talking about an entire galaxy, an entire universe that these people hop around through. So coming together for some sort of funeral service on a moment's notice just may be a thing that in practicality doesn't happen. And the last thing that we'll talk about, since we're on that medal, keepsakes, keeping things around, keeping memories of the departed. The most famous example I can see of that is, so somehow, some way, Kylo gets Vader's melted helmet and keeps it in a box of ashes that I would presume may be Vader's. What kind of level of thing is that? Is that seen elsewhere? other than now Mike has mentioned, the keepsake of Han's medal, and then again, Rey has the sabers of Luke and Leia, and then buries them in some sort of thing. But is that something that people do? I mean, Boba keeps Jango's armor, but to repurpose it and reuse it.
Yeah. And he keeps his dad's ship.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure how he eventually got that back, because I know it got its wing cut off in one of the episodes of Clone Wars, and it crashed, and there was a big explosion, but you don't see the aftermath of it.
So is anybody in the Star Wars galaxy sentimental, or is this what we're seeing, that maybe nobody in the galaxy who believes in the Force is learning the teachings to not have attachments? Is that a thing?
Well, I'm sure there's people that are sentimental. It just goes back to whether it fits in the story to acknowledge it or not. Kind of like, again, they have it's not just that they buried Shmi Skywalker and the other two, presumably members of the Lars family, but they buried him like right next to the homestead, so that they will always be within sight of them. It's like they don't want to forget them or bury them way out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So there's that level of kind of respect. And yeah, they did make a bigger deal of the dice to try and have some physical representation of Han, like when Luke goes aboard the Falcon and he pulls the dice out from the cockpit and he goes to sit down at the table and he's just kind of looking at those dice. That it's like, and then that's of course what he also sends with the Force projection as well, for Leia to actually hold it, implying sentimentality when he says nobody's ever really gone, and he gives her that. So that's a bit of, in a way, of other aspects of sentimentality, or like how even Leia or Padme held on to that little carving that Anakin had given her after all those years, and was buried with it, or cremated, or whatever it is that happened to her. So yeah, there's sentimentality there somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. I was gonna that was just gonna bring up the Anakin and Padme wood carving. I think whether aligned to the Force or not, these little keepsakes are definitely a way of the characters, and an easy way of having us, the audience, to see the characters have this affection and sentimentality for one another when they've gone through the rigors of war, of the Star Wars, and losing loved ones, but still holding on to something. It's, I think, an easy and understandable way to see that that kind of affection and love for one another remains even when the kind of transitory existence of the life of these characters ends, and however it does. And I think it's one could say, oh, it gets to being a little bit mawkish. They're looking at little nuggets and holding on to them, but what better way to remember characters and people in life than through objects that bring about the most powerful memories and the most affecting experiences that they shared together, whether it was a ride in the Falcon or an opportunistic meeting in a junkyard on Tatooine. So it increases the kind of relatability and sentimentality, and it allows us to ground ourselves a little bit more. And these are human, fallible characters, and they can still hold on to aspects of those who they've lost and cherish them beyond.
I think that's it, and I think it's really a good place to wrap this up. Is we are all imperfect beings. They are all imperfect beings. There is all but imperfect writing in going on in what is happening, and things happen in there, but it's written. It's a universe. We see what they need us to see. We'll always get more in the books and the novels and the comics, and they'll fill in some of this. and there will be new aspects to talk about down the road. Is, you know, the Force will change, what happens with it, how characters will live, characters will die. We're seeing tons and tons of new characters brought in the High Republic era, and tons of characters who are perishing in the High Republic area. But in our own realism in real life here is bringing it back to what I said in the beginning. Weep not for those who have joined and become one with the Force, though we will, and we have. And Rich, we love you. We miss you. There will be a celebration of his life soon happening. Check the page for more details. And we will definitely hope to see you around again. So from all of us here at the Unifying Force, may the Force be with you.
With you. May the Force be with you, Rick.